In 1989, the prime-time ITV quiz show Bullseye was on the TV, and a gentleman from right here in Milford Haven was making headlines as he was going to be the star of the show.
Nice to see you. You're from Milford Haven down there. It's a lovely part of the world. You've got an unusual hobby, John, haven't you?
That unusual hobby was murder. Hey everybody, Matt and
Danielle.
Back with you, and now we are in Milford Haven, down on the Pembrokeshire coastline. In the 80s and 90s, this beautiful little location was plagued by a violent robber. He used to wear a balaclava and have a sawn-off shotgun, and he would target individual women's houses. So he would go in, make sure they're on their own, often tie them up, rob them and go. And it did 16 houses in a 10-year period. However, that wasn't all he did, because that man was John Cooper, who lived here in Milford Haven. And whilst he was carrying out the robberies, he was also a serial killer. So in 1985, a house just a couple of miles from here called Scoveston Park was found to be on fire. So the fire brigade, the police, all descended on it to try and put out the flames. And inside, they found two bodies of a brother and a sister. The bodies were those of Richard Thomas and his sister, Helen. So on entering their house, they found the bodies of the brother and sister, but they also found that they had been shot. So they'd been murdered before the house was set on fire. So there was a big search suddenly went up. Who had committed this double murder? Richard was 58 and described as a reclusive millionaire. His sister was 54. They had been bound and gagged and shot in the head. The newspapers suggested it must have been the work of two people, and they also picked up on the fact that Richard had earlier that day been out for a homosexual encounter. So the thoughts were, was it the person he'd been with? The trail went cold for the next few years. So in 1996, a group of 5 teenagers from Milford Haven had been out over summer and were coming back across the fields to their house in a housing estate not far from here. And they were suddenly faced by a man with a balaclava and a sawn-off shotgun. Unfortunately, he assaulted the 2 female members of that group, and also, of course, he held the others at gunpoint. Yeah, this was just another in a crime wave that seemed to have hit Milford Haven and Pembrokeshire in general over now nearly 20 years. John Cooper had been carrying out violent assaults and robberies across Milford Haven now for quite a long time, but the clock was ticking. People who commit robbery over and over and again get sloppy, and that's what happened with John Cooper, because on one of his last attempts at robbery, he was targeting another single woman just as another person, possibly the husband, I'm not sure, came home. So he fled, and the things he'd caught, he'd kind of got hold of, he threw into some bushes nearby. So when the police went to look, they started to look through what he'd taken, And potentially, I think there might have been something of his own possessions there. But the police did a search of all the properties in the area at this point. They went door to door and they knocked on John Cooper's house. Now, John Cooper lived about half a mile away from the centre of Milford Haven. And inside they found like a treasure trove, a collection of all the places he'd robbed. So piles of jewellery and other things, wallets, watches, other things that he'd taken. So they had got their man. And John Cooper was given a prison sentence for 14 years. So Cooper may well have been behind bars, but the police did not link him to the 2 murders at Scoveston Park, nor the 2 that he would go on to commit just 3 weeks after appearing on Bullseye. So this is the beautiful little haven in Pembrokeshire, just a few miles from Milford Haven. And it was a favourite spot of couple Peter and Gwenda Dixon. And they often came here on holiday. And on this particular time, it was June 1989. They were on their last day of their holiday, but before they packed up and came home to Oxford, they decided to do one last walk on the famous Pembrokeshire Coastal Walk, and they headed towards Broadhaven. So now we're on the Pembrokeshire Coastal Path at Broadhaven. Little Haven is about half a mile back. This path, in parts, covers roughly 180 miles, so it's quite a long stretch around the coastline and beyond. And unfortunately for Peter and Gwenda, on that day in June 89, when they went for a walk on the coastal path, they were face down with a man with a shotgun and a balaclava. He tied both of them up and he demanded that Peter give his bank card and PIN number over to him, which he did. But even so, even after that, it was still, unfortunately, the end for the Dixons, because the man with the balaclava shot both of them on the cliff edge, and once they were kind of killed, if you like, he attempted to kind of push them down the cliff edge. 2 days after that, they were reported missing and the search was on. So after committing the murder, Cooper went back into Milford Haven and went to a cash point at Nat West, and he withdrew from the Dixons' account £300. He killed them for £300, which is just extraordinary. If he'd removed his mask, it's quite possible the Dixons might have possibly even recognised him, because it was only 3 weeks after he'd appeared on Bullseye, so he'd been on TV at that point. And yes, he didn't win on Bullseye. Maybe his frustration at not winning made him come out to commit murder. But unfortunately, what it meant was that this area, Pembrokeshire, now had a serial killer that needed to be caught, with 4 murders to John Cooper's name. The police were still convinced that John Cooper was the man behind the killings, and he was still in jail for the armed robberies on his 14-year sentence. So they opened up a cold case kind of investigation into the 4 murders to see if they could piece things together. One of the things they looked at was the sketch that had been done by a witness of a man stood at the cash point. And it was also a stroke of luck that somebody then said, "Did you know that John Cooper had appeared on Bullseye?" So the detectives watched through the episode of Bullseye, and at the same time they'd brought back out the sketch done by the witness of the man at the cash point. They had their eureka moment. But unfortunately, they were not able to tie the murders to him at all. And after 14 years, Cooper was released, and he was once again back on the streets of Milford Haven. John returned home to his wife, and the very same night, police received a phone call to go to John Cooper's house. The reason being, John Cooper's wife had died. Although, of course, the suggestions were that had John committed murder, it seemed that his wife just hadn't the will to live with John Cooper coming back into her life again. At this point in time, things like DNA testing had become a bit more a tool, if you like, for people to be caught for their crimes. And they once again looked at that kind of picture that had been drawn, and looking through the things they'd taken from Cooper's house originally, there was a pair of shorts, and they ended up being the same shorts that were worn by the person in the drawing. And just through luck more than anything else, once again, they re-examined the shorts for DNA, and they found in the hem of the shorts some of the DNA of Peter Dixon. When questioned about this, Cooper actually said they were his shorts. In actual fact, it wasn't just blood off Dixon that had gone when he shot him. They were actually Peter Dixon's shorts. Whether Cooper had changed into Peter Dixon's shorts after he'd killed him is unknown, but in actual fact Cooper gave himself away, because when he was being questioned about the drawing of the man with shorts, he said, well, they are long shorts. The shorts here, the physical ones, were short shorts. It was only then they realised that the shorts had been turned up, and by releasing the stitching, the shorts were at their full length, and that is where the DNA was found. The police also re-examined the shotgun that they had confiscated in the raid at Cooper's originally. Though missed the first time round, this time they realised that the shotgun had actually been painted. They scraped away at the paint and, once again, found underneath the paintwork DNA evidence that could convict John Cooper. That DNA was the blood of Peter Dixon. Finally, they had enough evidence to get their man. Cooper was rearrested in May 2009, and after a trial was convicted in May 2011 for the killings of Richard and Helen Thomas, of Gwenda and Peter Dixon, and the 2 assaults on the girls of the teenage group from 1996. His crime spree across Milford Haven and beyond had lasted from 1985 to 1998. It's quite hard to imagine sometimes when you're in a beautiful place like here at Broadhaven, that there is such horror and evil attached to it in the past. But thankfully it is now something that is going into the past. Cooper was locked up for life, and eventually that was changed to a whole life term. So even though he's now in his 80s, he's never going to see the daylight again. To the victims of John Cooper, rest in peace. To the family and friends of the victims, I hope you found your peace in time. And certainly to the gang of teenagers who were attacked as well, your lives must have changed forever from that day onwards. I hope you managed to get some enjoyment back in life eventually. What a horrendous time back then for this area to have been facing, and all the victims who were of course assaulted in their homes. Shocking really to think so much went on here in a 20-year period. Cooper is where he deserves to be and will stay there forever. Thanks for watching. We will see you very soon for the next video. Take care. Bye for now.